Leah Talks Limited presents extracts of My Nearest Relative is Grief, written by Leah Brown, read by Leah Brown and Hardeep Singh Kohli. My Nearest Relative is Grief. Author's Note on Grief. London, 2023.
Truth. I need to be straight with you. The truth is more important to me than you might know. So I need to be honest from the get-go. So here we go. This was not supposed to be an autobiography. This was not supposed to be a memoir. This was not supposed to be a book about my mental health. This book deals with someone else's mental health. This book deals with the impact of their mental health on you. This book deals with the impact of my mother's mental health on me. My name is Leah, and I am my mother's nearest relative.
Nearest relative is a special term used in the Mental Health Act, 1983. It gives one member of your family rights and responsibilities if you are detained in hospital under Sections 2, 3, 4 or 37, under a community treatment order, or under a guardianship. Your nearest relative is not the same as your next of kin. The next of kin doesn't have any rights under the Mental Health Act. The concept of nearest relative is an important safeguard for people who are affected by the Mental Health Act. The nearest relative is another way of making sure that your rights are protected when you're not well enough to be relied upon to make those decisions. It is normally someone that you trust.
When I started writing this book, the plan was to explore what it means legally to be someone's nearest relative. I thought that by sharing my experience about my own journey through this tempestuous and troubling landscape, maybe this book could be of some help for those who knew as little as I did when this all started. That's what I thought I was doing when I started. But the truth is that this is a book about grief. My grief. Framed around the 7 stages of grief, I explore how I became the nearest relative. You will learn much of the things that came before and those which followed. It is a book about my mother. It is a book about my father. It is a book about my brother. It is a book about me. This is a book about a family that is fundamentally dysfunctional. A family that, despite every effort, couldn't do any better. It is a story about a resilient and tenacious child who did the best she could until she learned how to do better. A girl who, even into adulthood, believed that the next day might be better. A young woman who fought for freedom at all costs. The scarlet thread that laces these chapters together is the indomitable human spirit. A spirit which allows us to survive the seemingly unsurvivable, to find a way through the darkness, allowing us eventually to move on from what we once were, to become what we are now. I didn't realise it would be a coming-of-age book at the outset, but that is what it has become. That is the truth. In the late 60s, in her book On Death and Dying, American-Swiss psychologist Elisabeth Kübler-Ross highlighted the 5 stages of grief. This model for loss and bereavement changed the world of psychology, with Time magazine naming her as one of the 100 most important thinkers of the 20th century. Her approach was later modified and adapted to become the 7 stages of grief. They are as follows: shock and disbelief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, loneliness and reflection, reconstruction, acceptance. It seems to me that, much like grief, self-awareness comes in waves, in stages. Therapy is a central feature to this book. I, of course, am an advocate, but I could not prepare for the things I would remember along the way. I was ill-equipped to face up to the fullness of my experiences. Thankfully, I had the wherewithal to write everything down. I took detailed notes in every session, 5 notebooks for 5 years of trauma counselling, without which the construction of this book would have been impossible. Upon discovering that the feelings I had long held at bay were predominantly that of grief, I became keen to share my experiences. With memoir, that presents a unique challenge, as it is hard to respect the rights and dignity of the living. I have pseudonymized individuals' names, but all locations, times, and events are, so far as I can recall, truthful. From the outset, the aim of this book was to legitimize the experience of grief when no one has died. I wanted to convey the notion that, even without a corpse, one could still feel a profound sense of loss. Loss felt in unimaginable, unavoidable, irretrievable situations. Loss that cannot be quantified in the absence of a dead body. Loss that mounts if you choose to sweep it under the carpet. Loss gathering in those secret, dark corners of the mind. Loss that will eventually seek repayment for the emotional debt accrued. Fear not, dear listener. I am an optimist. My cup is half full. This is also a book about hope, about learning, about transformation. A book in which you can find yourself, no matter what your experiences. Who I am is relevant. I identify as many things. A lover of Ben & Jerry's half-baked ice cream, Black British, a phenomenal musician, African American, an articulate, outspoken woman, Caribbean, a committed Christian, Dutch, and someone with a penchant for champagne. Not Prosecco. Never Prosecco. Many would agree that I am a citizen of the world. I am well educated, part of the UK's scholarly class. My story is not one of poverty or being working class. It is not a story of rags to riches or of social climbing. There is some talk of money, but only insofar as one has to figure out how to make one's way in the world. This book explores the truth that there can be no grief without love. It questions the meaning of family, race, and identity. It recognizes that sometimes we do not and cannot have what we need. It speaks of letting go of the things to which we have clung to survive. At points, this book speaks of burdens heavily borne needlessly for far too long. It recognizes that there is a lasting toll of grief, a legacy persisting long after you have surrendered to its interminable process. This book will make you laugh, and it will make you cry. It will definitely make you cry. There's a lot in this story that warrants a trigger warning. It will take you to uncomfortable places where sensitive listeners might not dare tread. For that, I make no apology. I hope it makes you tear your hair out. I hope it gets deep under your skin. I hope it changes your life. That is the point. I have written this book for people who need encouragement to see the power in their own stories. To stray from the fullness of my experience so as to not offend strikes me as inauthentic, untruthful. I believe this book has captured the essence of what it means to be human. As the late Toni Morrison advised, I have written the book I most needed to read when I was in great distress. There is something in this book for everyone. I hope you enjoy My Nearest Relative is Grief as much as I have enjoyed writing it.
Shock and disbelief. It's discouraging to think how many people are shocked by honesty and how few by deceit. Noel Coward, Blythe Spirit. London, January 2023.
When it comes to shock and disbelief, I should be the authority. But in reality, my experience has been distorted. Shocking things happened all the time. Things you wouldn't believe, daily. Sometimes more than once a day. Too often. How can a child be expected to know that the experience of shock is trauma? That a child is not supposed to sustain such intensity over such a prolonged period of time, far less survive it? Objectively speaking, the madness became the mundane. I did the only thing I could do. I disconnected. I became desensitized. There was no time for disbelief. There was no offer of aftercare. My tolerance for shock increased because this was the way things were. The technical term is cognitive dissonance. An inability to experience events in real time created a dissonance in the way I coped with the experience of them. That's largely down to fear. My pervasive recollection is of not knowing how I got here or there, not knowing how this or that happened. No amount of force was going to help me, but it was all I knew. Discipline, self-sacrifice, self-control. I couldn't understand, no matter how much I forced myself to try. I needed to dispense with the need to understand, but I didn't know how. The way I was exerting force may have been unduly punitive, save that I was fighting to stay alive. I had to stop needing to understand. I had to learn to be present without questioning the whys and wherefores. I had to learn how to be. Please do not misunderstand me. I still have an intrinsic need to understand. When faced with things that have not been explained to me, things I cannot contextualize, things I cannot understand, I find myself in a very uncomfortable place. And in that place, even to this day, it is easier to pretend that things are not happening than it is to accept that I am shocked by them. I suppose, if you dissociate emotionally from a situation, you are no better than a fly on the wall. You're observing what is happening, rather than being part of it. When you look at everything through that lens, the impact cannot happen in real time. I think, like most children of divorce, and let's be honest, a lot of the subject matter of this book is because of my parents' marriage, there are two sides to every story. As a lawyer, I'm trained to see both sides. But when you're piggy in the middle, caught in the constant crossfire, you don't have the luxury of being shocked. My greatest terror was that I couldn't trust the adults in my life. When you are told on one hand that your father is the enemy, and on the other hand that your mother is dangerous, where do you go? Either could be true, but neither protects you from the resulting maelstrom swirling around you. I had no choice but to get on with it. Shock and disbelief had to wait.
Canisters and Kittens. Virginia, 2008.
It doesn't make sense. I am stunned, but more shocked by how much this seems like a pointless charade, a stunt gone wrong. What was the point of encouraging us to make our way over to this hospital if she had no intention of seeing us? I specifically say see us, not see me, because it is the right question. However, I don't really want to see her. I want to do the right thing, to say the right thing, to be the daughter needed in the moment. I don't even feel like I'm pretending. But the truth is that I am astonished that in the space of 6 hours, Mother has contemplated the staging of her own death and threatened to burn down the house. Is there ever a justification for that? Never mind the kittens and animal cruelty. Has she intentionally foregone spending time with her only daughter for yet another day? Is this what madness looks like? How did she get here? Was it in a police car? Was she handcuffed? I am raging. But then I speak the words that make everything feel so utterly real. Middle-aged woman threatens to use petrol canisters to burn herself and her house down with her kittens inside to make a point. The humour hits like a mosquito bite, short and fast, and leaves a similarly uncomfortable tingling sensation after impact.
Bombarded. Yorkshire, 2017.
I have been consumed by Mother, by her needs. That I will admit. My actions have been dictated by her demands and her perceived sense of urgency. The idea that I could in any way use my mother's plight to provide relief to me? That would mean that some good would come of it all. But there is nothing good. More than anything, I want this to stop. I would happily never speak of it again. Instead, I am a spinning top with a magnet affixed, and as I slow down, I am sucked into her orbit once more, her gravitational force stronger than my own resolve. My identity must be immaterial to her, secondary, for her to survive. I realize that I must look like her enabler. The advice I'm getting, from people who think supporting me looks like chastising me for the way I am dealing with all of this, is defunct. The insinuation that I am intentionally manipulating this situation, a situation I don't want to be in, for my own ends, continues to cut me in the same way it did when I heard it for the very first time. I want to vomit. I feel like someone has reached into my mouth, their arm down my esophageal canal, their talons grabbing my stomach, pulling it out so that I cannot vomit. I ruminate on the wretchedness of it all, at my own wretchedness. I am devoid of tangible emotions. Any further consideration of the matter is an exercise in futility.
Nearest relative. London, 2017.
The nearest relative cannot be a minor. It has to be an adult. The closest, nearest adult. But as my mother, she is supposed to be the adult in the room. I am beginning to realize that that was never the case. It certainly is not the case now, and perhaps has not been for quite some time. I am considering that I may have been her nearest adult all along. Her firstborn. The child she failed to protect. The child she didn't know how to love. The child she couldn't stand up for. The child she forced into becoming the adult in the room for the both of us. Many years have passed since then. We have long been strangers, but the law is right. So long as we are both alive, I am bound to her in circumstances such as these, whereby nearest and relative apply only in the loosest sense, and adult is merely a formality. But in this moment, I know that we are not the same, she and I, mother and me. I am seeing afresh what has been true for many years. As I have become an adult, she has become my child. The differences are obvious. I know how to take care of her. I know what is required. I know what it means to make difficult decisions at great personal cost. I know how to do the right thing.